Hey, what's going on, everyone? Happy opening day and welcome to episode 50 of Sports Speak. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
We're joined by Zoe Alter and Rahill Jaiswal today to preview the MLB season. We did the same thing last July, and today we'll be recapping and taking a look at all of the various divisions in the MLB, previewing some of the awards races, and of course, making our World Series picks. But before that, the last time Zoe was on the show was when we were previewing the Super Bowl. And me, Tim, and Rahill picked that Leonard Fournette, Rob Gronkowski, and Antonio Brown, respectively, would score touchdowns in the game. Zoe Alter said that none of them would, and all three of them ended up doing so. And then she also said this about the Chiefs.
Okay. Well, my pick for the game is I go the Chiefs. And this is why. I know Tom Brady's had success. And, it's been a pattern all season that hasn't worked out for me. But let's doubt Tom Brady once more. The thing is that the Chiefs' offense is so powerful, and honestly, I don't see anyone stopping it. The Bucs have to.
Whoa! The Chiefs' offense is so powerful that nobody was going to stop it.
The Chiefs' offense just didn't pull up. They just didn't.
I mean, in Zoe's defense, like half of their offensive line was injured.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm pretty sure if you went on later. After we had the discussion, I think both Rahill and I both mentioned about the fact that when you looked at that offensive line, especially from the tackle perspective, who was playing left tackle that game? He played tackle for the Panthers, and he was the same person that got destroyed by Von Miller. I'm trying to remember who that was, but we had that whole discussion as well. And the fact of the matter is, fast forward, what is it now? 2 months in Super Bowl, 3 months. It still feels good. I'm real happy that the Bucs won the Super Bowl.
Okay, so
you guys can bow down to Brady as long as you want. That is totally fine. There's no doubt in my mind he's the GOAT. I expected more from the Chiefs. I was disappointed. Plus, I wasn't gonna be boring like all of you. You guys are like Bucs. Like I had to change it up. Like you guys are so boring. I had to bring something exciting.
I think Antonio Brown scoring a touchdown in the Super Bowl isn't necessarily boring, but you know what, Zoe, you can make better of that with your picks here for this new MLB season. And most exciting thing is that we have a 162-game season, a full slate starting with Thursday opening day going all the way through. Some rule changes are staying the same that we saw in 2020, but others are gone. At least for this year, there's no universal DH, but some other rule changes are returning. But let's just start generally, and I'll start with Tim here. What is the biggest storyline you're looking at heading into this season?
To be honest, when I'm looking at going into this year, it's not really, all right, who's going where. For example, Trevor Bauer this last during the offseason, and, how is he going to cap off a Cy Young year? But really, I'm going to continue to look at the COVID storyline. We've seen the massive impact COVID's had on these teams, especially in college basketball of late. And the fact of the matter is, yes, okay, the numbers are going down. Obviously, yes, there's vaccinations out, which is now huge. Compared to where we were 6 months ago, this is a huge start for sports. Fans finally being able to be in stadiums and so on is massive. But we can't ignore the fact that throughout all this change in positivity, COVID is still going to be a factor, especially for some teams. So I'm still very intrigued to see how teams, especially the MLB, traveling cross-country on a regular basis now in this full 162-game schedule, how exactly they will handle coronavirus. And will we see teams like the Marlins last year or even the Philadelphia Phillies have a massive outbreak that could cause problems for a team down the road and maybe cause constant schedule changes? I think that made the difference last year, and I'm eager to see now with a full schedule how the MLB will handle it, especially the fact that, like last year, when you had COVID, your team's probably not playing throughout an entire week. Sure, you have a lot of months to make up games, but realistically, with all these set off days and so on, it's going to be a little bit tough to make up a week of baseball unless you extend the season.
Yeah, and I know some people might say, well, the NBA, yeah, they've had a couple of COVID cases, but they're indoors even, and they haven't had many issues. But there's a couple of things with that. First of all, in baseball, simply when you're in the dugout, let's be honest, even last year when they were supposedly mandating masks in the dugout, there were not a lot of masks in the dugout. Everybody was very close together. And then the biggest thing of this is the NBA, you play 2 or 3 games a week. In baseball, it's an everyday thing. If you have a bunch of players quarantined, you miss out on a series, 2 series, and suddenly you're like the Cardinals trying to rush through 50 games in 40 days. Like, you don't want to be in that scenario once again. So it's going to be interesting to see how Rob Manfred really enforces things this year. But I think in terms of gameplay, what I'm most looking forward to is seeing the New York Mets and the San Diego Padres. Both of these teams spent big in the offseason. The Padres really replenished that rotation, bringing in Yu Darvish after his huge year with the Cubs last year. Of course, their offense is strong. And this is the second time A.J. Preller, their general manager, has spent a lot of money. He did back, I think it was 2015, with the Upton brothers and others, and that didn't work out. So this is a chance now for him to redeem himself and try to capitalize against the Dodgers team that might have a little bit of a post-World Series hangover. With the Mets, there's obviously been a lot of controversy this offseason. A GM getting fired, Steve Cohen getting involved in a potential fraud scheme with the stock market a couple months ago. But regardless, the team is ready to go. They have Francisco Lindor. Of course, his contract extension and Michael Confortos will both be important things to watch as we get into the beginning part of the season, if they will be returning next year. But for this season, both these teams have really talented rosters, and it's going to be fun to see what they can do. Rahill, over to you, your biggest storyline heading in.
Well, my first storyline was, can the Yankees stay healthy? But that's already gone out the window because Luke Voigt is injured now. So there's that. But I'm actually looking forward to seeing what the Mets do. I mean, they have the talent. Question is, can they put it together? That it's going to be very interesting. I'm also interested in what Tim said, whether we're actually going to get a full season or we're going to have to go based off win percentage again, because there was a good amount of teams who didn't even play a full 60 games last season. They came a little short. So we'll see if we have to go based off win percentage again.
Yeah, I'm surprised at least that the MLB didn't give a little bit of a buffer, like even cutting it down maybe to 154, 156, just so you could leave a couple spots for teams to make up games a little bit. It wouldn't really have made much of an infringement really on having a full season, just cutting out a couple of games and leaving a little more margin just in case there were those positive tests. But finally, Zoe, over to you, your biggest storyline heading into the 2021 season.
Well, I'm biased, but obviously it has to be the Mets because that's the biggest thing. I mean, I'm always for the Mets, but Mr. Smile comes in. I am so psyched for him to see what he can do. It's going to be weird to not have some players that we've had in the past, Rosario in there. Like, it's going to be a little odd. It's going to take some getting used to, but I'm very excited for that. Also, my biggest storyline, it might be a little generic, but I'm really excited for the Bauer-Kershaw thing because I think that you have two guys who could be ridiculous aces wherever they go. They're both fighting for the Cy Young, right? And you put them on the same team. And obviously, we were watching this storyline with DeGrom and everything if Bauer had gone to New York. But I think how do the two of them get along? Because Bauer wants to be in the position where he's the ace and he is not challenged. Is Kershaw going to let that happen? Kershaw has been a guy that is ridiculously good year after year. So that's probably my biggest thing outside of watching the Mets because I'm stuck up like that and need to root for my home team. But out of them, I'm really excited to see the pitching duel going on in Los Angeles.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting with Bauer and Kershaw, especially since Kershaw feels that he's restored some confidence in the Dodger faithful with how he pitched in the World Series and eventually them winning that World Series. And I think it's even more enhanced. Like, I feel like if Bauer had gone to the Mets, it wouldn't have been as much of a competition between him and DeGrom because I feel like DeGrom wouldn't really be fazed by that. DeGrom has dealt with pitchers with personality his whole career. Noah Syndergaard, Marcus Stroman. He already has a lot of personalities there. And, you know, these are guys who are big-time social media influencers. Jacob DeGrom uses his Twitter to put up pictures of his trips to Costco with his parents. That's not the way he is, and it's not really something that bothers him, and it doesn't faze him, and he does well. Trevor Bauer, we know he's maybe the most outspoken player in the league, if not one of the more outspoken players in all of sports right now. He wants to really become the face of this Dodger franchise. But Clayton Kershaw is like, hey, I just delivered this World Series to you. I finally got over the hump in the World Series. So that's going to be fun to see. Also, I think it's interesting how the Dodgers announced that David Price, who opted out last season, is going to be starting the year in the bullpen. So you're going to have Bauer coming off of an amazing year, Kershaw, former Cy Young and MVP, and then you have another former Cy Young currently out of the bullpen. And maybe if David Price, once he gets some reps in, can be inserted into that rotation and have a little bit of a spark, the Dodgers could really have a chance to try to defend their World Series title, something we haven't seen any team do in nearly 20 years since the Yankees did it right around the turn of the century. But we've talked a lot about the Mets. Zoe and I both highlighted them as our biggest storyline. So, Tim, of course, some big moves bringing in Francisco Lindor. We know DeGrom's going to be great, but they did not get some of those other key free agents like Real Muto or Bauer. Where do you see this team this year, and how do you think they'll compete with like the Braves and the others in a really talented National League East?
Well, how can you forget the biggest move the Mets just made recently, and that's bringing back the black uniforms, the things that fans wanted so much, might I add. But, when I look at the Mets moving this year, this NL East is competitive. Last time when Rahill and I were both on Sports Speak together, we both talked about how really this NL East in general could be a flip of the coin. Listen, I know for years when the Mets made moves such as the Robinson Cano trade, we said, hey, the Mets are going to be good. They're going to be just like 2015, if not better. But this year I'm convinced this team is better as a whole. They have the capabilities to play very good offense. Let's not forget last year, this team led the major leagues in batting average. That's something the Mets hadn't done in a very, very long time. So the fact of the matter is, this team has the capability and the promise to play good offensively. The question, though, still comes pitching, because the Mets, to me, didn't really make the necessary moves during the offseason to fully put together a team bullpen-wise. Rotation-wise, that's a little bit different. They made some answers. They got Carlos Carrasco, who unfortunately right now is hurt, but they'll deal with that. And yes, you got your key player. You got Francisco Lindor. Sure, you missed out on a couple of free agents, but I expect this Mets team to be competitive. And at the end of the day, they're going to be above 500. And I know we don't typically talk about that for the Mets, but they're going to be above 500. They're going to play good baseball. And at the end of the day, I'm not giving them the whole Yankees talk of what's expected and what's not. But for the first time in about 10 years, I'm really confident in how the Mets are going to play, and it's going to be good baseball. Obviously, the Braves are going to be a tough team to beat, but I think they're far better than the Nationals and the Marlins. And, I mean, who else? The Phillies. I feel like they have a bunch of old players. They're a bit of an overrated team, in my opinion. The Mets have a purpose to play with. Now the question is, can they beat Atlanta?
Yeah, the Mets and Braves battle is just going to be as exciting probably as the Dodger-Padre battle over in the West. But the thing that really is different to me, and maybe Zoe, you could add on this, like with the Mets this year, it feels like compared to past years, they got better in the spots that they needed to get better. Sometimes the Mets make moves to try to make a big market move, and there's really no reasoning to it. But the three major things they wanted to fix, they wanted to get a better infielder, especially with Robinson Cano being suspended for the season. They get that in Francisco Lindor. They did have to give up both Rosario and Jimenez has done really well in the spring with Cleveland, but Lindor is one of the best players in baseball. At catcher, you needed a catcher you could trust. You get James McCann. He's a great defensive catcher. He's hit really well for power these last couple of years with the White Sox. Get him in a 3-year deal. And finally, you have a young catcher, because between John Buck, Wilson Ramos, it's been 10 years of over-the-hill catchers for the Mets that have really not panned out. And then the third thing is their starting rotation. Behind Jacob deGrom, due to injuries last year, that rotation was depleted. And they made some very questionable moves last year, bringing in guys like Porcello and Michael Wacha, who were coming off of disastrous seasons, and they pretty much rolled the dice on them. This time, you get Stroman back, and Marcus Stroman has pitched really well in the spring. And then Taijuan Walker, Jordan Yamamoto, Joey Lucchesi, these are all guys who pitched well in 2020. They're not guys that couldn't get signed anywhere else. They're people who pitched well, and Steve Cohen was willing to throw a little bit of money towards and get them into the rotation. And they still have David Peterson, and eventually they'll get Syndergaard back and Carlos Carrasco. So they certainly have options. Zoe, where do you see the Mets heading this season?
I think it's going to be good for the Mets. This is also my thing with it, is that Steve Cohen, right? In the past, a lot of Mets players, whether they admit it or not, I think a lot of them, especially as fans too, there was a hesitancy because we all wanted to see the Wilpons go. No one wanted to see the Wilpons succeed. No one wanted that to happen. But now that Steve Cohen's here, you have an owner who wants the team to succeed, who's willing to put his money in, and the fans want him to win. The players want to win. And as a whole, I think the organization wants to win more than it did in the past. And for me, that's the whole thing, because you can have whatever players you want. You can put whoever you want in there. You can play however you want. But if you don't want to win, you're not going to get anything out of it. And this team wants to win more than I've almost ever seen in the past. Especially, I mean, we're talking about all these players, but do we forget you have one of the best hitters in baseball in Pete Alonso? Like, you still have such a strong lineup. And you, as you were saying, Eddie, you added guys or you needed them as well. So I think it helps. You have guys coming off of injury. It only looks better for the Mets. And for me, it comes down to attitude. Everyone wants to win. This whole fan base is connected, and we're all ready for the Mets to win.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rahill, finally with you, Atlanta Braves are also a really talented team. Ronald Acuna Jr., they have a young rotation. They almost knocked out the Dodgers in the playoffs last year. How can the Mets contend with them? And do you see them contending with them this season?
That's a really good question. I don't see them winning the division over them, but I definitely do see an interesting battle with them. But I mean, you guys kind of hit the nail on the head. It's like it's a new culture now for the Mets. You know, before they were kind of the team you took digs at, like, oh well, at least we're not Mets fans. But this is finally the culture that they needed. So they should be very competitive in the division. I'd still favor the Braves, but I mean, I honestly think the Mets are going to the playoffs this year.
Yeah, and this is a real opportunity for the Mets to change really the perception that they have. Like, I was in a bookstore yesterday and I see one book about the Mets, and it's Mr. Met with his hands over his eyes, and the title is "So Many Ways to Lose: The New York Mets." Like, this is an opportunity now that the Wilpons are gone. Of course, a couple of rocky things in the offseason haven't really helped change that message, but now they can actually prove it on the field. But let's shift gears to the American League. And this is where we're going to start breaking down each of the divisions and eventually making our picks. And I want to start in the AL East because I think we can all agree the Tampa Bay Rays, after their great year last year, are going to take a step back, losing both Blake Snell and Charlie Morton, two of their main starting pitchers. They do have some young talent, but it's going to be tough not having much of a rotation. Yeah, they've gotten through it with all these openers, but I don't know what to expect there. I think Boston is still going to struggle. They're going to be a little better having Alex Cora, but there's still holes in that team, especially in their pitching staff. Baltimore is still awful. The Toronto Blue Jays, we don't even know where they're going to be playing. Some games in Florida. Maybe they'll get back in Canada before the season's over. But last year, they got into the expanded playoffs, and now they're going to have a slightly more veteran team. They also bring in George Springer. So I think they can contend, but I still think that this is a big year for the Yankees, an opportunity for them. Bringing in Corey Kluber, that was a high-risk move. But if he pitches well, when you have both Cole and Kluber in that rotation, that's going to be one of the best in baseball. So, Rahill, I'll start with you. What are you looking at in the American League East, and who do you think is winning the division?
Well, I mean, I think it's the Yankees. I think Toronto really can. I mean, Toronto's got a scary lineup. Question is, they just don't have the pitching outside of Hunray Yu as their starter. They really don't have the pitching to get it done. So this division should be the Yankees, but knowing how it's going to go halfway through the season, Judge is going to get hurt. Then Giancarlo is going to go down. So it's going to be the same story. Luke Voigt's already out. It's going to be the only way the Yankees, I mean, really don't make it out is if they implode themselves with injuries. And that's honestly, that's a real possibility. So, I mean, the Yankees, they're going to win. I think they'll win the division, but question is, can they go further than, can they finally make it out of the American League is the question I'm asking.
Yeah, the Yankees have had some really bad losses in the playoffs these last couple of years. Tim, do you think they can get through the American League East? I know you always harped on, especially last year, how the Yankees can be a streaky team, especially how they can maybe be so strong in the regular season and then struggle in the playoffs, but also can go through stretches in the regular season where they're miserable, as we saw last year in between their two big winning streaks. So what do you see, and do you think they can win the division?
I think they can win the division. If I'm being honest, when we first saw the news for all the moves Toronto made, I really thought this team was going to be, incredible. But then when I look back at it, it's like the pitching, as Rahill mentioned, I don't think is going to be able to carry over this roster. And again, the spring training games have no tell of anything, record wise, anything. But in games where we've started to see pitchers, go further, in games we're starting to see at bats become just a tad bit more important. The offense has been there for Toronto as expected, but the pitching fully hasn't, gone full circle. Now, on the Yankees end, I'm a little bit worried. The bullpen's already the biggest question as it is. Chad Green has been a major concern for me this entire spring training. He's been hit around. It's been very rough. Darren O'Day's been good as expected. I almost wish we had him 10 years ago, if I'm being honest. And, the way I'm looking at it now is, sure, we have had those average performances such as Jonathan Loaisiga, who has pitched well. We know what we're going to get out of our starting rotation, but it's the thing about being healthy. And I think when it comes down to the wire, Toronto is going to be a lot healthier than the Yankees. We already had Luke Voigt injury, and I remember last episode I said, here comes the barrage of Yankees injuries. It's just starting. Wake up the next morning, people are flipping out saying Aaron Judge is hurt. Not the case he's sick, but yet alone another Yankees injury scare. It's only the beginning, and it's going to start within these first couple weeks of the regular season now that players are playing every day. The fact of the matter is, though, I think that this Toronto team is good, maybe just a little bit overhyped, but they're still good enough to be a playoff team. But I think the Yankees are going to win the AL East. The question is, and Rahill also mentioned it too, playoffs, I don't know. This is the least optimistic I've been in a long time about a Yankees going into a season. I don't feel like these moves are World Series potential. I don't feel like we made anything or made any effort to make the team better for the first time since maybe 2014, 15. So with that being said, hey, it's proven me wrong before. For example, the Utah Jazz. Right now, I'm going to be negative Tim about the Yankees. I don't see us winning a World Series, and I hope I'm proved wrong.
Oh, yeah, nobody wants negative Tim, but, the Yankees, I understand what you're saying here because they didn't make a lot of moves. The biggest deal for them was that they were able to keep DJ LeMahieu, which really shouldn't have been as big of a challenge as it was. And, of course, he is impactful because he's the only big contact hitter on this team. Everybody else hits for power, and he gets on base, drives in runs, and is also sometimes that runner that can be brought home on a dinger from Voigt or Stanton or Judge. But of course, health is going to be an issue. And it sort of reminds me in some ways of how the Mets have been over these past few years, where they throw caution to the wind with that rotation. You've got two guys in Severino and Kluber who are expected to really carry the freight in that rotation, who have barely pitched since 2018. So yes, maybe they could be really solid. We've seen what they've done before, but there was a lot of uncertainty behind Garrett Cole in that rotation. So finally, Zoe, for you, what are you looking for in the American League East?
Well, for this one, I have to say I have to give it to the Yankees because I don't think it goes to anyone else. But you guys are all counting out the Blue Jays a little bit more than I would like to think. That being said, I am a person who I love to see offense. It's one of my favorite things. I always love hitters. I'm always looking for them. And the pitching is a key component of it that I think they're missing a little bit. But honestly, if your offense is doing so well, you can get by with just mediocre pitching. And I know that's like kind of weird to say, especially because baseball is so pitcher focused today. But if you are scoring so many runs every time you're up at bat and every time you have a chance to, and it doesn't matter how many runs the other team scores if you're scoring more. And I think that's the big thing for this team is that they need to keep up their production. And that's one of the things that is going to be the make or break for them. Either they have ridiculous production or they have no production, and that depends how far they go. Do I think they're going to win the World Series? No, I don't. Do I think they're going to win the division? No, I don't. I think the Yankees are getting the division. But I would say don't count out the Blue Jays as much as you're counting them out because I think they're going to be a solid wild card. And then also the Rays, sure, they've taken a step back, but they're still not that much worse than they were last year. And I think they're a contender too. And for me, other than the Orioles and the Red Sox, who are kind of just a lost cause at this point, especially the Orioles, I think the Rays, the Blue Jays, and the Yankees are all really fun teams to watch this year. And I think, honestly, any three of them could take the division. In my opinion, I'd say Yankees take it, and the other two get wild cards.
Yeah, I think there's a good chance we could see multiple playoff teams for sure out of the AL East, especially since there's a lot of weak teams in the Central and the West. I also wouldn't completely, I don't think Boston's making the playoffs, but I don't think they're going to be awful either. They're all excited to have Alex Cora back as their manager. They have some really impressive prospects like Bobby Dahlbeck, Alex Verdugo, who have gotten the opportunity to play in the big leagues and have done a pretty good job. So, the one thing with them is their pitching staff, and obviously being without Chris Sale is going to hurt them immensely. But
I don't think it's because they're awful. It's just because compared to the other teams that they're going to be facing against, especially the fact that they have to play the Blue Jays a lot, they have to play the Rays a lot, they have to play the Yankees a lot. I think that's one of the reasons why in my head they're one of the worst teams, is because in any other division they'd be like, oh, maybe they can have a chance. But in this division, I don't see any way that they can do anything.
yeah, 57 games against those three teams, almost 40% of their schedule there. But let's shift gears to the AL Central, where I think I might spark some debate here, because I actually have Cleveland winning this division and not the Chicago White Sox. I have the White Sox making the playoffs, but I think them losing Eloy Jimenez to that injury is going to be really crucial to this team. I know they still have some really talented bats. You've got Abreu, you've got Anderson, and you've got Luis Robert, just to name a few. And they're a very young team. But the Indians, I'm really impressed with how they've pitched recently. And it's amazing how this team, they'll trade away pitchers and then they just keep bringing up new guys and they pitch just fine. I mean, Shane Bieber came out of nowhere, it seemed like, over these past 2 years, got an All-Star Game MVP in 2019, and then last year pitches so well. Of course, he got dismantled by the Yankees in the playoffs, but in the regular season was dominant. And they have a talented rotation. You've got young guys like Tristan McKenzie, Adam Savali. You've got a deep bullpen as well. I like this Indians team. Losing Francisco Lindor is going to be interesting, but Andres Jimenez has done a good job with them and will probably play a lot of shortstop. They still have Jose Ramirez, so I think it's going to be really close. I have Cleveland getting the nod over the White Sox just very slightly. I have the White Sox making the playoffs, though, as a wild card team. I think Minnesota is going to be iffy, and the other two are going to be behind, though. I am excited to see some of these Tigers prospects coming up. This time, let's start with Zoe here on your impressions and predictions for the AL Central.
Jimenez is good. I agree with that, but he's not Lindor. And that's going to be the biggest thing, is that you can't – in Lindor, you have a guy who every time the ball's even near him, you know it's an out. It's an obvious out. At the plate, he's a spark, all of that. Jimenez isn't that. He's great, and he's still good, and I loved him when he was on the Mets, especially for the end of last season when we saw him a lot, but he's not Lindor. And for that reason, you obviously do take a step back, and I don't think they've done enough to surpass Abreu and the rest of the White Sox. So for me, it's the White Sox taking it. I do still like the Indians here, but I think the White Sox take the division, no problem.
All right, Rahill, your opinions on the Central.
I'm going to go with the White Sox too. I mean, I completely agree with Zoe. You lose Lindor, you lose Carrasco as well, who was a pretty solid pitcher in that rotation right in the center. It's really tough to say. They've definitely taken a step back. So I'll go with the White Sox. But again, I'm not counting the Indians out. I feel like that'll be a very fun race to watch, and we'll see what happens. It'll come down to the last couple games this season, but I think I have the White Sox edging them out.
All right, and Tim, over to you on the Central.
I'm going to continue along with the train. I think this is the year for Chicago. It's been up and coming for a while. And this team has a lot of potential. It's just the fact of the matter, will they be as consistent as they are throughout their first 20 games? I mean, how many years in a row, when we think about Chicago, have they played so well early on? Just so well. In fact, at times they even have the best record in baseball. And then come around All-Star break, they completely fall apart. They lose games in bunches. But this year, this team has capability offensively. The big problem with the White Sox over the last 5 years in particular has been, what was their pitching going to do after they lost Chris Sale? And all of a sudden, they've started to put together. They got good innings last year at Dallas. They found ways to be productive and especially build that bullpen. You mentioned Eloy Jimenez being gone. Sure, that's huge. But the guy that needs to step up for that team and has been, if I'm being honest, underwhelming his last 2 years has been Yoan Moncada. He's got to step up. He's got to make those big plays and be the player he was meant to be. We know he can hit for power. We know he could be consistent, but he just hasn't shown it the last 2 years. Without Moncada, in my opinion, if he's not playing well, that team may not play well to open up the year. I think he's the difference maker. But at the end of the day, that White Sox team has talent. Not taking anything away from Cleveland, but outside of Shane Bieber, I'm not really convinced in that rotation. And sure, the offense can have a couple of questions, but I feel like Kansas City's done a lot more to make themselves a better baseball team than that team for Cleveland has this entire offseason.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see. And nonetheless, the White Sox, it's amazing how far they've come. Just a few years ago, they had Chris Sale in the locker room with scissors cutting up their alternate throwback jerseys. And now they've come to become one of the powerhouses of the American League. But let's finish it off with what I think could be one of the most interesting divisions to watch this year, the AL West, because, of course, the Astros somehow ended up 500 and then one game away from making the World Series last year. So clearly they didn't need to be banging trash cans to be competitive, but they did lose George Springer, and they're also without Justin Verlander. There's a lot of question marks with their rotation. They do have some young guys like Urquidy, Javier, and Brandon Bielak who could really be impressive, but questions there. But then when you look at the rest of the division, the Oakland Athletics, you never know with them. They always struggle out of the gates, and then they'll come back. And, of course, they still have their young core with Chapman and Olsen. With Seattle, they've got all these old Mets and Yankees prospects that they've gotten in trades that are all going to be playing well. Expect Jared Kelenic to make his major league debut during the season. Of course, Kyle Lewis, the reigning AL Rookie of the Year, but always a lot of questions in Seattle. The Angels are old, and the Texas Rangers are the definition of mediocrity, in my opinion. I've got Houston winning the West. Let's start with Rahill here. What are your predictions here in the AL West?
I can't speak today. I'm going to agree. I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to go with Houston. I'm going to go with as much as I hate to do it, I'm going to go with them just because, I mean, like you said, the Athletics are just a team you can't count on. They're so inconsistent. And yeah, the Astros are going to be without Verlander, but they did add Jake Odorizzi from the Twins to their rotation. So that'll definitely help. They still have a couple of good young guys there. And yeah, I still think Altuve and Correa, I still think they're very good hitters without the trash cans. So I'm going to go with them. But again, this division is wide open. But let's be real here. This division is wide open, but I've got the Houston Astros.
Tim, how about you?
You know, I really do want to pick the Astros, but sometimes pitching does have to prevail. And that's where I think the Oakland Athletics can do this. Don't get me wrong. They traded away their highest paid player in franchise history of Chris Davis this offseason. And no, not the Baltimore Chris Davis, the one that could bat 247 consistently his entire career. I think the fact of the matter is this. You can't underrate this team's pitching staff. Sure, their offense with a bunch of mediocre role players has been inconsistent, needless to say, but this team can win a bunch of 1-0 ball games. It's just the fact of the matter of this. This team is meant for longevity. They're very good at it. Not taking away Houston. For the record, I see Houston being a playoff team. In fact, I see the AL West in terms of the American League divisions being the strongest division of baseball. As weird as that sounds, the strongest division in the American League, not baseball. I can't jump to that because in baseball, the NL teams are a lot more powerful. But I expect it to be the strongest division in the American League in terms of record-wise. And I think that the Astros are going to make it far. But the fact of the matter is, when you look at regular season record and consistency, Oakland's been that team. I think that they can continue their consistency in being underrated as well. Don't count them out. Houston's going to be good. I'm eager to see if the Angels can step up for the first time in a long time, although there's still not much promise there. The Rangers did make some moves. And by the way, that pitching rotation for them continues to get better and better, especially with a lack of names. Overall, I mean, this West is going to be solid in my opinion, but I got to go with the Athletics.
And finally, Zoe, over to you.
Are we forgetting that an Astros team last year that was completely banged up, lost so many people, almost beat the Rays and came back? Do we remember this? I think they get players back. They get other players. I mean, you mentioned they add Odorizzi to their pitching lineup. I feel like, for me, the Astros take it. The A's without I mean, there are just a couple players. If you subtract a couple pieces from the A's, I don't think they're anywhere as strong. What are the A's without Matt Chapman? You know, like I just feel like there are just certain things like that. And then I mean, that's how it looks for me. And then with the Angels, I mean, Mike Trout's always scary. He's one of the scariest players in baseball. He's the obvious MVP every year. He's that one guy you always look to. But we've seen time and time again, he can't carry a team. He can play the best anyone's ever played. And the Astros aren't going to win, not the Astros, the Angels aren't going to win the World Series because he can't carry them all the way there. So for me, it's the Astros. I think everyone else could be competitive. And I think the A's are a team to watch because they are underrated, but they don't come close to the Astros for me just because of the pure star power that the Astros still have.
All right, so we're going to take a break from the division previews and do our American League awards. We're only going to focus on two right now. We're going to focus on MVP and Cy Young. So let's start with Cy Young in the American League. And I considered a couple of guys when I was thinking about this. Of course, Shane Bieber is the defending Cy Young, and there's not a lot of really lights-out pitchers that come to mind in the American League. But even as a Mets fan, I'm going to say it. I think Garrett Cole's going to win the Cy Young this year, not the MVP, the Cy Young in the American League. I think he's going to do a good job carrying the Yankees rotation that has a lot of uncertainty and a lot of changes from previous years. Cole really established himself. He had a couple of slightly rocky starts getting started. I remember he had a game in Baltimore where some Yankees fans were a little freaked out that he gave up a couple of home runs, but still, the American League is known as the offensive league. They always have been, and National League has been the one known for pitching. But I think Garrett Cole is going to be able to get that Cy Young this year. We'll just share now with our Cy Youngs. I'll start with Tim here on his.
Yeah, I picked Cole last year during the short season, and Eddie, again, I'm going to have to agree. The Yankees haven't had a Cy Young in a long time, but there's no doubting in terms of baseball in that American League side that Garrett Cole's arguably the best pitcher. And don't get me wrong, he allowed a lot of long balls last year. That's the downfall of his game. But I think he worked extra hard, especially during this offseason, to try to better his stuff and continue to get stronger and stronger and stronger. Garrett Cole is, an elastic band, I like to call it. He could throw 140 pitches, no problem, and not lose his velocity or stuff. He could come out, he could strike out 15, 16 batters if he wanted to. He has great movement on his pitches, with the exception of the fastball, of course, and he finds ways to be effective and throw hitters off. Last year, you predicted Shane Bieber. I think he has a worse season this year. It's really hard to continue to be consistent. Shane Bieber, in my opinion, is a good pitcher, but at the same time, he's more of a average pitcher upon the league. And I don't mean, I shouldn't say an average, above average pitcher, where he could be good. The question is, can he be consistent every year with this stuff? That I'm just not convinced about. I think, though, Cole is going to be dominant. I think that he has a reason to prove because he still wants to win a Cy Young Award. And no better time to do it in a year where it's an underwhelming year for the Yankees and they need him the most.
All right, Zoe, how about you on Cy Young?
I want to pick Garrett Cole. I really do. And this is the one thing holding me back is that what happens to Garrett Cole and his pitching when the Yankees team behind him dissolves? What happens when everyone gets hurt and you put in guys who don't play that often or your field kind of dissolves a little bit? Can he do it all by himself? And we've seen pitchers do it. We've seen DeGrom do that when his field sucks behind him, and we've seen that from him. But can Garrett Cole continue to pitch how he's been pitching if that team dissolves? And because of that, I'm calling him an underdog. He's not really an underdog, but I'm going to go Shane Bieber just because I think he has to be consistent to keep his team alive and to keep them running. And Garrett Cole, I think it depends because if the Yankees behind him are playing well, I think he takes his foot off the gas without meaning to or not. I think it does happen. And if the team behind him collapses, and his stats definitely get worse. Shane Bieber has to play at a certain level all year for his team to do well, and that's why I'm going with him.
All right, Rahill, lastly, you on AL Cy Young.
I'm glad Eddie went with Garrett Cole because I didn't want to seem too biased. But besides Bieber, who else can you really throw in the discussion? If Verlander was healthy, you can definitely throw him in there, but he's not healthy. I'm going to go with Garrett Cole. A lot of people freaked out last year when he struggled, but you have to remember it's tough, and especially in a 60-game season. If you actually look back at his run in Houston, he actually really struggled in the first, couple starts. Not in New York, but his ERA was was similar. It's just that the Yankees weren't scoring enough runs because they're way too inconsistent. So, everyone, that's what sometimes annoys me about Yankee fans. And that's why I'm glad sometimes the Yankee fans are hated, because they're so annoying sometimes. We signed Garrett Cole and they crown him the king. He gives up 2 home runs and he gives up a couple runs. They're like, oh, why did we sign this piece of junk? He's not worth this much money. That's what I hate about New York media in general. But I mean, if there's a message for Yankee fans, if he struggles to start the year, let him get his rhythm. He'll get his rhythm, and I think he'll win the Cy Young.
Yeah, New York is a very tough market. I remember the rainy first game with Giancarlo Stanton. He struck out a couple of times, and already Yankee fans were booing in the Bronx. Like, game one. It's his first game. It makes no sense. But I think a couple people that are under the radar that you could kind of think about and keep an eye out for. One is Lucas Giolito with the White Sox. He's been really impressive these last couple of years. I also like Tyler Glasnow from Tampa Bay. Got some experience pitching in the World Series, and he's going to have an increased role with no more Snell out there or Charlie Morton. So I'd watch for them. But let's talk AL MVP now, because there are certainly, while there's only a couple guys to think about for Cy Young, I think there's a lot of candidates for AL MVP. I know a lot of people might automatically jump to the conclusion of Jose Abreu because he just won it last year. He really came into form and what we really originally expected from him. But I saw an out-of-the-box pick that a bunch of people have had, and I'm actually going to side with this. I like Bo Bichette from Toronto. I saw a couple people from SNY picked him, and I'm jumping on that bandwagon. I feel like out of all the sons of former players, how ironic is it that the son of probably the least known out of the three, out of Biggio, Guerrero, and Bichette, that Bo Bichette is actually the one who's really panned out the best, it seems like, for this Blue Jays team as an all-around player. He's a great defender. He can hit the ball well for contact and for power. The important thing will be for him to stay healthy, but he can also steal bases. Of course, Trout's going to be up there like he is every year, but I think Bo Bichette is going to help to lead Toronto into the postseason. I have him as my MVP. Rahill, I'll start with you on the AL MVP.
I don't want. I was gonna originally go with Trout, but he's been injured the last couple years, so I feel like he's gonna. I feel like he'll miss too many games to be considered in the MVP discussion. There's a lot of different options. Obviously, as a Yankee fan, I'm hoping it's Judge or maybe even DJ. DJ was up there. Toronto, you look, honestly, Vladimir Jr. could be a candidate with that team. I'm gonna go with I'm actually gonna go with Alex Bregman out of Houston. I feel like they have an increased role now with a lot of the guys with Springer gone. Bregman is sort of the underrated bat in that out of those 4 guys. Everyone talks about Correa, everyone talks about Altuve, everyone talks about Springer. Not many people talked about Bregman. So I'll go with him. And if I have the Astros making the playoffs, I think he'll elevate them there. So I'll go with Bregman for the MVP.
Yeah, Bregman often undervalued now that Altuve is getting older. Correa has been a little streaky at times these last couple of years. He's been really a consistent factor and played really well for them in the playoffs. Zoe, how about you on AL MVP?
I'm going to go kind of along the same route as you, and I'm going to go Guerrero Jr. because I love Vladdy. He's one of my favorite players to watch. I think he's so fun. And Bo Bichette, I understand that pick, but the thing with Bo Bichette is that I think in that group of 3, when you think of one of them, in my head, Vladdy's the first one you think of. I don't know if you guys think of it differently.
Well, yeah, but that's sort of because how he was originally hyped. The way that the baseball media treated Vladdy Guerrero was probably the most hype we've seen around a prospect since Trout. But I feel like since then, I know Vladdy can hit home runs, but I feel like Bichette has a bigger impact on that team.
I don't know, because I still think it comes down to who gets the most press. Why do you think Trout's won it so much? He's not on a good team. Sure, he puts up the numbers, but you got to get the attention. And Bo Bichette, sure, we love him and he's come up and he's been great, but he's not getting the same attention that Vladdy's getting. And we're all looking at him, sure, but it's just different. And because of that, I say everyone loves a home run hitter. Everyone loves a guy who's consistent. Vladdy has been consistent. Last year, we even saw him starting to get some hits too, which is something that previously we all thought he was only a home run hitter, but has put in singles, doubles, things like that as well. And sure, he's slow and it's funny watching him run, but I love Vladdy for this pick and I take him.
All right, Tim, lastly, over to you to wrap up the American League.
It is tough when I think about the American League side because obviously, Bo Bichette is a good underdog, as you mentioned, Eddie. I think that it's very entertaining. I think Vladimir Guerrero Jr. has done a lot this offseason to make himself a better player. But in a 162-game season, I also feel like Mike Trout does have to redeem himself a little bit. Rahill mentioned injury history and how, he tends to get hurt a bunch and miss a couple games, but still be effective. But last year, let's be honest, sure, you could say Jose Abreu's a favorite, but I don't think of him as an MVP. Realistically, I thought he was overrated and shouldn't have been MVP last year. And we had that debate. I still don't truthfully think that. But at the end of the day, I think Mike Trout has a lot to prove. Again, without him on the field, that Angels team is nothing. I think it's going to be tough in regards to who gets it because I think there could be a couple underdogs that could come out of nowhere and compete. But I mean, the simple solution is always Mike Trout. And I think he's going to have another very strong season to continue on what's been an excellent career. And again, with or without him, the Angels will have to find a way. But I think this is going to be a good year for Mike Trout yet again.
All right, so let's move to the National League. Now, me and Tim have already discussed this a lot, how we think Braves, Mets, Dodgers, Padres, and whoever wins the Central are pretty much the favorites when it heads to the postseason. But the most important battle to watch will be who wins each of those two divisions, because whoever loses has to enter a one-game playoff against a really good team. For example, the Mets then would have to rely on the back of Jacob deGrom against either Yu Darvish and the Padres or against potentially Trevor Bauer and the Dodgers in a one-game sudden death playoff. But we've already previewed the East a lot. I'm going to say the Braves win the division just by a little over the Mets. I think the Mets will make the playoffs and be a wild card potentially as that 4 seed and get a home playoff game at Citi Field just like 2016. But the Braves, they found a lot of young pitchers. Max Fried, Ian Anderson, they've got some guys they can trust who also did not really cave in the big spots in the playoffs. I know there was that one awful game against the Dodgers where they gave up all those runs early, but and of course they did choke that series in pure Atlanta fashion. But you know what? I think the Braves, Ronald Acuna, Ozzie Albies, they'll piece it all together and win the division over the Mets. I also think the Marlins are going to take a little bit of a step back, but they're not going to be as awful as past years. I think Don Mattingly has figured something out somewhat with this roster. They're not going to be like last year in the 60-game season. I don't think it's going to be awful. So, Tim, I'll start with you here on the NL East.
I'm going to have to say it's the time for the Mets. And last year I said, hey, they're going to be a wild card team at best. And obviously that wasn't the case. But again, the confidence is going to continue. I think this is New York's time. This team has the most potential it's had in a very long time. And listen, the Braves are the favorite. In fact, they're projected as a top 5 team in baseball going into this regular season. But the fact of the matter is this. Yes, the Braves are great. They have the good offense. But I'm still not bought into fully Atlanta's pitching staff. You have a bunch of no names that sure you add into the rotation. For example, Max Fried, just to give him that guy that's pitching opening day, in my opinion, is just an average starter. Sure, he's had great stats here and there, but I think he's just an average guy that just happens to play well in his home ballpark. And let's not forget the fact of this matter, too. Atlanta, in my opinion, Eddie, has had their opportunities to try to go out and win the World Series title. They blew it twice. They really did. Sometimes good things have to come to an end. And I think that the Mets winning the National League East is essentially the start of that change and transition of power in that division.
So me as a Mets fan is hyping up the Yankees more than Tim, the Yankee fan, and then it's the exact opposite here with the Mets. But Zoe, how about you weigh in here in the NL East?
I want to pick the Mets so bad, but I think I have to go with the Braves just because it's the Mets and I feel like they always find a way to blow it no matter what. And sure, we can talk about the Braves and how they've blown it, but it's the Mets at the end of the day. Like something is going to go wrong and something's going to break and we're all just waiting for it to happen. So I think because of that, I'm going to pick the Braves. I do think the Mets do make the playoffs, but I think they, as you mentioned, Eddie, I think they do get to the wild card and they might get in that way. But for me, I think it's the Braves just because, especially what it comes down to is these teams can both play however they want against everyone else, but it's going to come down to their head-to-head matchups. That's going to be what decides the division. And when I've seen the Mets play the Braves, I've usually seen the Braves come out on top. And for me, that's the difference maker because the Braves have this sort of energy against the Mets that the Mets just never seem to get. And that might change the season, and I could be completely wrong. But if I put these two teams against each other, I think the Braves win. And for me, that's why I picked the Braves to win the division.
Mets always have trouble when they play on the road in Atlanta. Rahill, lastly, you in the NL East.
I kind of already alluded to it when we were talking before, but I'll go with the Braves. Yeah, you guys mentioned they have a young pitching rotation, but they added Charlie Morton, so he'll bring that veteran presence. And in the postseason, Charlie Morton's a big game pitcher, so that'll definitely help him. If they get back to somewhere and they have a lead in the series, he'll probably be able to close it out. But I do think the Mets get in, and I do think they win that one-game series just because Jacob deGrom is an absolute monster. And then maybe they can make some noise with their pitching rotation and, maybe stir up some stuff and maybe even get to a championship series. But as of now, I have the Braves winning the division.
So let's get to an interesting division here. The NL Central, who last year got all these teams in the playoffs. They had 4 teams in the postseason, and they all get eliminated. It was a disastrous playoffs for the NL Central, but there's a lot of changes going on with this division. Of course, the Cubs are entering a rebuild. There was recently news that Anthony Rizzo, they could not agree on a long-term extension, looking like he'll become a free agent. No more Kyle Schwarber. No more Yu Darvish. They do bring back Jake Arrieta to kind of channel some of that old Cub magic, but this is a very old team now. And thinking about how much youth there was just a few years ago, it's completely changed over there in Chicago. Yes, David Ross did a good job as a manager last year, but they got beaten by the Marlins in the playoffs. And that's not really a good taste to have in your mouth heading into the season. I've got to go with St. Louis to win the division. I think Cincinnati still has some talent, but they don't have Trevor Bauer anymore, and I don't really trust the pitching staff. Pittsburgh is awful, and they're still one of the worst teams in baseball. And then Milwaukee, I don't really trust what they have behind a couple of key guys. Of course, they still have Yelich. Of course, Keston Hiura has become a really talented second baseman, and they still have Josh Hader as their closer. But their rotation top to bottom isn't that great, and they don't have much of a lineup behind those couple key guys. So I'm going to go with the Cardinals. They've got a lot of young prospects who have made pretty quick impacts. They also have Dylan Carlson, an outfielder who could be one of the key rookies to watch. He's the number 13 overall prospect. They still have Yadier Molina. They've got a solid pitching staff, cornerstone by Jack Flaherty. So I've got the Cardinals. This is the weakest of the 3 NL divisions, but I'm going with St. Louis to win it. Rahill, I'll start with you in the Central.
I'm going to agree with you, Eddie. I think you kind of hit everything. You hit you hit all the points basically. I'm going to agree with you there. Maybe Milwaukee can make a heated run, but again, I just feel like Yelich, it's almost inevitable. I feel like he's going to get injured. I feel like something's going to happen, whether it be with the back because he's swinging for the fences too much or something like that. And once pretty much Yelich goes down, I don't think Milwaukee goes anywhere. Cincinnati lost Trevor Bauer, Cubs in a rebuild, and the Pirates suck. So Cardinals are the safest pick, so I'm going to go with them.
All right, Tim, how about you?
It still astonishes me how statistically they gave the Pittsburgh Pirates more of a chance of winning the World Series than the Baltimore Orioles. The Orioles, in my opinion, are a far better team than Pittsburgh Pirates. But when we look at it in terms of the NL Central, to me, it's really a tie between, and I don't mean a tie in division, but I'm really tied between, the Chicago Cubs, because the last 2 years, let's be honest, we've wanted to underrate them. We wanted to say they've gotten worse, but yet they've been there in the end in the playoff hunt and have surpassed expectations. Sure, they're not the World Series team they once were, but sometimes that age has helped them out a little bit. And listen, I have a lot of faith in David Ross. At the same time, you guys also mentioned it as well. The St. Louis Cardinals are convincing. You go out, you trade for Nolan Arenado, who is arguably the best third baseman in baseball. I think there's a lot of potential for those bats. And again, it goes back to the point of why they traded for Paul Goldschmidt a few years ago. I think this is going to be a close battle. It's like I want to say the Cubs are going to surprise people again, but I think that maybe we could see a game 163 this year between both the Cubs and the Cardinals, but the Cardinals taking it.
Yeah, should be a close division. Zoe, wrap it up here on the NL Central.
The Cubs are news of the past, and the Brewers without Yelich aren't much. So I think you have to go for St. Louis because for me, that's the clear favorite. And I mean, Nolan Arenado, I've always been a huge fan, even when he was with the Rockies and everything. I love his play. I love his glove. And then you back it up with his hitting, which is just great. But I think add that to St. Louis, and I don't think anyone else can beat them, especially just because Rahill, as you mentioned, like, other people departed in the division. The only people on other teams who were dangerous, Trevor Bauer obviously was dangerous. He's out of the equation. Yu Darvish is out of the equation. Anyone else who may have possibly been a threat to St. Louis is gone. And the other teams are just teams that used to be good but are now overrated.
All right, so let's talk about the last division, the NL West. Now, in typical years, these past few years, a team that has won the World Series has fell apart the year after. Not completely falling, out of the playoff picture, but they're not the same dominant team that they were. But the Dodgers have tried to go against that by actually adding and bringing in Trevor Bauer, and they have one of the most formidable rotations out there. Yet the Padres also did the same thing, and they bring in Joe Musgrove, Blake Snell, and Yu Darvish to pair with Chris Paddock. And even though Clevenger's hurt, they still have the best rotation in baseball, in my opinion. The other three teams, the Rockies are a mess right now, trading away Arenado and not getting much back, and they have a lot of aging hitters and nothing much to say there. San Francisco and Arizona, decent teams, but nothing more than 500. It's Dodgers versus Padres. I've got San Diego winning the division, which would set up a wild Dodgers-Nets wild card game at Citi Field, but I've got San Diego winning the division. Zoe, I'll start with you here on the West.
I mean, I'm surprised you said the Padres because I go Dodgers for this one. I think they did everything they did last year, and they add Trevor Bauer on top of that. Their lineup is so deep. If one guy goes down, it doesn't matter because they have a million more. And that, for me, is what it comes down to, because we have to remember we're back to a big schedule now. We're back to playing full games, and we're going to see more injuries as a result of it, right? So we're going to see guys where they go down there after the rest of the season, and teams are going to have to deal with it because it's over the stretch of so long. And the Dodgers can deal if they get injuries because they're so deep. Also, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure I saw the headline that said Tatis had something with an injury. I don't know if you guys saw that. I don't know how serious it is or what the deal with that is, but that in my head is already a red flag for the Padres. So I got to pick Dodgers just because of the sheer depth of this team and the experience, because they're here for another World Series win. There's no question about that. They added Bauer for a reason. They have all these pitchers, and that's their one goal here.
I do think the Dodgers have a lot of experience, but I won't say they have all this more depth than San Diego. I think the Padres have a lot of young guys who established themselves last year during the Slam Diego era. You've got Trent Grisham, Jake Cronenworth, guys that aren't really hyped up. You still have other veterans like Eric Hosmer, Will Myers that can really go toe-to-toe with this Dodgers team, even if they do have some injuries. I believe it was just a tweak in the elbow that Fernando Tatis Jr. had, but that is something to keep an eye on, especially since he just signed a 14-year contract with them. But Rahill, over to you here on the NL West.
Yeah, I was surprised when you picked the Padres. I'm really hoping the Padres can come out of nowhere, but come out of and pull something out. But I think the Dodgers are going to win over 100 games this year. We talked about the rich getting richer. They add Trevor Bauer, and man, it really pisses me off how happy LA fans are. You got LeBron and AD. I know they're injured, but you got them there, and now you have the Dodgers. The Dodgers are probably the World Series favorites right now. Kershaw's still going to be Kershaw. I don't know. We'll see if he struggles with injuries. He had a couple back issues last year, but I think he'll be fine. You still have Bellinger as well, and Bellinger and Mookie Betts are probably both going to be in the MVP conversation as well. And then you just add Bauer on top of all of that. It's the Dodgers, and I think they win over 100 games. But again, I do think we see a Padres-Mets wildcard game.
Hey, you completely forgot the biggest name in LA that Zoe would probably be excited about, Matthew Stafford going to the Rams, part of all the LA prowess. But finally, Tim, you Dodgers or Padres here?
I'm going to have to agree with Rahill and Zoe. I think it's going to be the Dodgers. I mean, listen, teams tend to slump after a World Series run, but typically teams don't turn around the next year and lose their division. Teams also don't typically get better the year after they win the World Series. They tend to get complacent. And yet the Dodgers, with that market, with the capability, signed Trevor Bauer, listen, you can have all the drama in the world between Zach Greinke and Trevor Bauer, but at the end of the day, both want the same thing, and that's to win yet another World Series. And listen, I think all the pressure is off of Clayton Kershaw. All we've heard is Kershaw chokes in the playoffs. He'll never win a World Series. But now that the Dodgers have finally won one, I think you're going to see a more relaxed Clayton Kershaw that goes back to being the Clayton Kershaw that we knew he was wants to be. And the fact of the matter is simply this. This team has offense like no other. Max Muncy's been a surprise, obviously. You know, you still have Chris Taylor, who's a very good role player. Can't forget Mookie Betts. He may be an MVP favorite, not hinting anything, but, you know, he was good as can be. And, of course, I think he's always going to continue to be that top guy for LA. Can't forget about Cody Bellinger either. And, by the way, what happens with Corey Seager? We'll see. We'll find out. There's a lot of potential with that offense, but I am going to say one thing. The Dodgers will win the NL West, but expect a trade deadline for them to get yet another big star to try to get themselves set up for another World Series appearance. What position will it be? I honestly have no clue, but going off LA's track record, they're bound to make something happen if it means winning a World Series.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Dodgers, they brought in Manny Machado just as a rental a few years ago, and I wouldn't be surprised if they make a similar move. But awards time, and now maybe the one I've been most excited to talk about, NL Cy Young. There are so many great candidates. Of course, you've got Jacob deGrom, you've got Bauer, you've got Kershaw, Max Scherzer wants a redemption year, Madison Bumgarner's pumped up for a strong season, Zach Gallen made a name for himself as well in Arizona last year, maybe even Aaron Nola in Philadelphia. But I think Jacob deGrom is going to make it 3 out of 4. I think he's going to come back. I mean, the way he's looked in the spring, I wish the Mets would have televised a couple more of those games, but he has been lights out. I mean, he's throwing 101 miles an hour. His velocity just keeps getting higher every single year. I don't know where the ceiling is on that. And just some of the best hitters in baseball, even Freddie Freeman, saying it's just impossible to figure deGrom out. I think he's going to have another huge year, really helping key the Mets to a very successful season. So I'll start here with Zoe on NL Cy Young.
I have to go to deGrom too. And this is why. Because normally I'd be like, oh, I think I'd go Bauer. But the thing with Bauer is that the level Bauer has to play at to actually achieve what everyone thinks he's going to play at is so ridiculously high. He basically can't give up. Like, he can't give up hits. He can't give up home runs. He has to be fully lights out. And I think he can handle the pressure, but I think that's a lot to put on one guy. And I think that deGrom, in the past, we've seen deGrom do that. We've seen him be so good, and he wants it, especially with a better Mets team behind him. He knows he has more of a defense than he did before. I want to see deGrom do it. I think he can do it. And I think there's too much pressure on Bauer, who would be the favorite. I think there's too much pressure on him to do it.
All right, so Rahill, over to you.
Yeah, all signs are pointing to Bauer because of the money he's got. You know, he's going to be the highest paid. But let's be honest. I mean, yeah, he had a brilliant ERA in 20, but again, he only pitched 10 games. Ain't going to cut it when you're going up against guys like deGrom. To me, it's deGrom. I think deGrom's the best pitcher, and he probably still be the best. He'll probably be the best pitcher until he goes. I've been a huge fan of him. I've been campaigning for him to get the hell out of get out of there. But now he's gonna stay. Now he'll be okay. But I'm gonna go with him. The dude's insane. He's a monster. He wins another one.
All right, and lastly, Tim.
I think this is going to go unanimously. I'm going to have to go with Jacob deGrom, but I am going to say this one thing since we've obviously talked a bunch about deGrom. I think that this year is going to be a great year statistically for Clayton Kershaw. Already, obviously, that brief discussion just about him, but I think that there's a chance this year, if he stays healthy, he has a chance of becoming a finalist. And one other player, too, that really has to redeem himself that I'm excited to see if he can is Max Scherzer. Let's not forget, Scherzer used to dominate the National League. And don't get me wrong, yes, he's getting up there in age, but he had a little bit of an underwhelming year last year. I think that this year he could spike it up in a 162-game season. I'm not saying, of course, he wins the Cy Young, but I think at the end of the day, he could be a potential finalist. And I would also not count out Yu Darvish. I think Darvish had a great year last year. He's going to continue with that little run and momentum that he had last season. I think Hugh is starting to actually find himself just a little bit too late in his career. And I think San Diego found themselves a real exciting pitcher over there.
All right, so NL MVP time, and I've got another surprise here. It's actually from a team that I don't have making the playoffs. I think it's going to be someone other than Mike Trout, who actually, doesn't make the playoffs for their team, but still is going to be very impactful. I say Juan Soto from Washington. If you saw what he did last year, when he was out at the beginning of the season due to COVID, he missed those exhibition games. He literally just got inserted into the lineup, and he started and hit 3 home runs in his first 4 games. He has become an incredible power hitter at such a young age, was 19 years old that first year when they called him up in 2019, and was an instant success with the Nationals. And I think for a team that maybe will be about the 500 mark this year. Of course, they've lost Harper, they've lost Rendon, they lost Murphy. Ryan Zimmerman is old. I think Soto is going to start to try to build a new culture there in Washington and try to build up this team when they realize that the rest of the division is on the rise. So it's really their move right now. Yeah, they brought in Josh Bell, Kyle Schwarber, and others that could kind of support them and bring in a little more of a veteran presence offensively. But I think Juan Soto is going to have a huge year. I think Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman are also some other keys, along with Tatis to watch out for. But I'm going to go right now with Juan Soto winning the MVP. Tim, I'll start with you here in the NL MVP.
You see, last year I went with, on the AL side, one of the most craziest MVP predictions, and that was Edwin Encarnacion. I'm going to go crazy again this year, but maybe not as crazy as what it sounds. I'm going to go with what is going to be the comeback player of the year. The reason why the New York Mets make the playoffs, and I say they sweep the NL race, I have to put all my cards on the table at Pete Alonso. I'm going to go for it. I really am going to go for it. I think Pete Alonso turns it around. I think he hits a lot better for average this year. He's going to lead the National League in home runs. He's going to be up there in RBIs. I think it'll be tough to beat Arenado because statistically Arenado has been a beast RBI-wise over the last 5 years. But he's going to be productive. I'm calling 50-plus home runs this year, minimum. And I think the fact of the matter is Pete Alonso will turn around that terrible season. That offense for the Mets is, again, they're going to be good. Jeff McNeil, incredible. Lindor, incredible. Can't forget about Dom Smith. I think he's a really good hitter as well. Where does he fit with no DH? We'll see. And that outfield can also hit for average, as well as James McCann. But I think Pete Alonso is going to be the guy that leads that team, and I think he's going to be this year's MVP.
All right, so 2 big surprises here. Rahill, are you going to go with one of the big names or another underdog?
You know what? I'm going to go with another New York. I'm going to go with a Met, but I'm going to go with Lindor. I think Francisco Lindor wins the MVP. He's got something to prove. All of his numbers were down last year. He's playing for a huge extension, and whether he wants to stay in New York or not, I think New York can be willing to give him the money. I was originally thinking Tatis, but after that huge contract, does he get complacent? I mean, when you sign a contract like that, it puts a target on your back, especially when you're going up against pitchers like Kershaw and Bauer. So, I think people, have been underestimating Lindor, especially when they made the trade. They're like, oh wow, he had a down year last year. I think he's got something to prove, and I think he's gonna love being with the Mets. I think he's gonna love the market, and I think he's gonna ball out. So I'm gonna go with Lindor.
Well, yeah, so Harper and Machado, their first years in 19 with their new contracts, they were in a similar position where they kind of got off to a slow start and then figured things out eventually. So lastly, Zoe, your pick here for NL MVP.
I'm going to go Nolan Arenado. And this is why. Because he's played in Colorado his whole life, right? He's played there. He's played in a market where no matter how well he played, the Rockies weren't going to be a World Series team. It didn't matter. He could have been the whole team. They weren't going to be a World Series team. But now he's in a place where not necessarily he's moved markets, not necessarily into like a New York type market, but he's in a place where he could potentially go deep in the playoffs with his team. And I know there's other people, and that's like a bold prediction in itself, but he's in a place where him playing ridiculously well could actually affect the way his team does. Because in the past, it didn't matter. The Rockies were going to suck no matter what he did. But now he's in a place where he can play his very best. He can put on a show for everyone, which he loves to do. and he can do that here, and his team can be better because of it. I think he's a total guy to watch, and I know he just signed that huge contract, but he strikes me as the kind of guy who he doesn't really care that much about the money. He just wants to play. And that's where I see it for him. So I think he goes fully crazy in St. Louis, and I think he wins this one.
All right, so now we're down to the big prediction, the World Series, and I know a bunch of people are going to go crazy with my picks here. So I know I picked Cleveland to beat the White Sox in the regular season and win the division. But I think the White Sox are going to be the first team since all those San Francisco teams to go directly from the wild card game into the World Series. And I think they're going to match up with the San Diego Padres. I know I've been down on Tatis a little bit, but I still think the Padres have a deep team, and I still think they have the best overall rotation combo with the bullpen. I think they have the best pitching staff in the major leagues this year. So I've got Padres, White Sox in the World Series, and I'm going to say that San Diego gets it done in 6 games and returns a championship down to the Friars. I think the Padres will get it done and win the 2021 World Series. I'll let Rahill make his pick first here on the World Series for 2021.
I'm going to go with the Dodgers to make it out the National League. American League is really wide open. You can look at the Yankees, but even as a Yankees fan, I still think there's just way too many questions on the starting rotation, the bullpen. Guys are going to go down. Who knows what it is? I think the Astros are going to make another run at it. I think the Astros are going back to the World Series, and the reason is I think because later in the season they're hopefully going to get Verlander back, and hopefully he's still around that number 1 level. Jake Odorizzi is a very good, solid pitcher. They still have Greinke there. And like I said, Carlos Correa, I know he's streaky, but he gets hot in the postseason. He really does. And the Astros have embraced that villain role and how they're against everyone, and that really fueled them. Like Zoe talked about this. The Rays were unbelievable last year. The Astros almost pulled off a 3-0 comeback on them. And regardless of what we want to say and how much I hate them, you have to give it to Correa. Correa is still a very good player. So I think the Astros make another run at the World Series, but I do think they lose to the Dodgers. And that would be sweet revenge for the Dodgers.
All right, Tim, over to you.
I'm going to have to agree with Rahill. And typically, again, remember how I was talking briefly how I thought that the Athletics would go on to win the AL West. But I think the fact of the matter is the Astros are going to come as a wild card team, go all the way with the team they have, and essentially win, or I shouldn't say win the World Series, but make it to the World Series and win the AL pennant. I mean, this is the weakest American League we've seen in a long time. I don't remember the last time that we haven't been able to predict a clear favorite, at least, on the American League side. And the fact of the matter is there's so many powerhouse NL teams. And the Dodgers, I still think, are that powerhouse team. I think that in a 7-game series, they are the most dominant team in baseball. And again, I already mentioned it. I'm going to be negative Nancy about the Yankees this year. Not in the fact that I'm going to cry every single time something goes wrong, but I have no confidence, and I mean no confidence in this team in the playoffs going to a World Series. And hey, again, I want them to prove me wrong. But the fact of the matter is, I see it ALCS, Astros, Yankees. Astros do what they typically do, and the story continues to go on, upsetting Yankees fans moving forward. And gosh, it sounds like I'm a Mets fan right now, doesn't it really? But the fact of the matter is, I have the Astros making the World Series against the Dodgers. And are we doing full-out predictions of who wins or no?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to say the Dodgers repeat and win against the Astros in, I'm going to say 6 games.
All right, and Zoe, lastly, your predictions here for the World Series.
Tim, I love that you were hyping up the Mets as much as you have been, but I will not do the same to the Yankees. I think the Astros take it from the AL side and the Dodgers take it from the NL side. Honestly, if not the Yankees, I don't see anyone else coming close in the AL. And so I think, if not the Yankees behind the Astros, I don't see anyone coming close. So I think you see the Astros from that side. Also, later in the season into the playoffs, we've seen the Astros heat up. It's what they do. And they become immediately dangerous, as if they weren't already, but they become even more dangerous the second the postseason starts. And the Dodgers, I've said enough about them all day with the addition of Trevor Bauer. I don't think it's even close. I think the Dodgers take the World Series.
All right, well, three of you about the same thing. I'm a little different here, but since this is our 50th episode, last thing for today, one of the most iconic moments here in Sports Speak was the preview last year when Tim Moore said that the Yankees would beat the Nationals 4-1. There would be 7 combined hits, and Giancarlo Stanton would hit a first-inning home run. And all 3 of those things happened. So, to try to follow this up, Yankees open their season against Toronto. What are your predictions for that game?
It's going to be low scoring. Garrett Cole will go 8 innings. He'll allow 4 hits. I'm going to say 1 run. That 1 run being a home run. And the fact of the matter is, the Yankees will win by a final score of 3-1. And if I'm going to get even more bold on my prediction, I'm going to say that there's a 2-run home run hit from. This is going to be tough. I'm going to say Aaron Hicks hits a 2-run home run, and the other run comes off a solo Gleyber Torres shot. And needless to say, the Yankees have about, let's say, 6 hits in the ball game. It'll be a quick-moving affair, but 3-1 come Thursday.
All right, well, let's see if you're the fortune teller like last year. My favorite one with that is that video when Mark Tuiasosopo hit his first home run with the Mariners. I think that was about 10 years ago. And the radio announcer for Seattle predicted exactly what count, what inning, what the score would be, and what part of the ball, what part of the park it was going to go to. So you got to check that video out when you get a chance. But thank you once again here to Zoe Alter and Rahill Jaiswal for joining us. Next episode, we'll be recapping the beginning of the baseball season, recapping the men's and women's NCAA tournaments, and then Tim and I will talk about the Bristol Dirt Race for NASCAR from this past Sunday, whether it was a success or failure. But that's all to come next time. Thank you to everybody who joined us today for our 2021 MLB season preview. We're all excited to enjoy an opening day and a full season after last year's strange, shortened year. And it's nice to see fans back in the park as well. The fans are such an important part of the major leagues, and it's great to see them back, even if it's in smaller capacities, getting to enjoy baseball and enjoy America's pastime. But until next time, I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
Signing off here on Sports Speak.